Well, I was at a local car show this past weekend and I happened to spot this fabulous fuselage car. It's a 1972 Chrysler Newport Custom. And this was getting close to the end of the run for the fuselage era cars. They were introduced in 1969, and then the end of the run for the C-body fuselage cars was 1973, before the cars would be redesigned. 1972 was the last year that these vehicles didn't have to meet the bumper standards, either in the front or the rear. In 1973, they'd have to meet the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, 5-mile-an-hour impact standard in the front, where they basically had to crash into a barrier at 5 miles an hour and have no damage. And so the cars looked significantly different in 1973 from 1972. And here, I think, is probably one of the best styled fuselage era vehicles, although I think they all look good, but this Chrysler Newport Custom is absolutely fantastic. And perhaps adding to the charm is this car's color combination. The Rallye Red exterior with the white vinyl top, white interior, white and black interior that we're going to see in a minute, and it's spectacular. You did not often see a full-size car in this bright red color, and sometimes I don't like it, but I think on this car it actually works. I would guess that somebody even bought this off the dealership lot. I don't know that somebody would have ordered it, but when they pulled into the dealership lot, maybe it just spoke to them on a sunny day like it was, as you can see here. And this is a great copy. It's got only about 22,000 original miles on it. And yes, those are definitely original miles. You're going to see by the condition of the car as we walk around it. Now, first, let's walk around this car and do a little bit of a styling analysis. Up front, you have the very popular during this time frame, although this was getting to the very end of the run, loop bumper. And the loop bumper here just surrounds the entire front of the vehicle, and of course encompasses the headlamps as well as the grille. The grille's got a little bit of that Barracuda look to it, I guess I should say. At least Barracudas of the era. But of course it's larger, wider, with more slots. But at least to me, the grille has a little bit of that 71 Barracuda look to it. Although of course the Barracuda didn't have that big loop bumper up front. But this really helps emphasize the overall horizontal nature of the car and its overall width. I mean, it looks huge. I have not stretched this photo out by any amount at all. And that big, long, relatively flat hood that just kind of curves up so gently to form the fender peaks. You have a very small kind of mound in the middle or surface in the middle. And then this beautifully flat hood otherwise that kind of gently falls to the bumper, creating enough gap for the hood overslam, and it does so, I would say, and makes it look really, really good. This was a relatively easy to execute design from a manufacturing standpoint, having that hood wrap all the way over to the end of the car. You don't have to fit it all that well on that dimension. And then you've got enough room for hood overslam and can kind of call it a day. But it looks great on this car, as well as that little gentle kick up and rise near the cowl where the wipers tuck under. Of course, hidden wipers during this era were quite popular. Hidden headlamps were too. I almost said that, but not of these Chryslers. The Newports didn't have them, nor did the New Yorker. You had to go all the way up to the Imperial to get hidden headlamps. I suppose that was likely for cost reasons as well as reliability. But that loop bumper grille was very popular with other vehicles at the time, including the late 1960s Chevrolets. You, of course, had other Chrysler vehicles like the 72 Plymouth Fury that had a loop bumper. Ford never really quite embraced it as wholeheartedly, I would say, as GM and Chrysler did. I mean, heck, the Chrysler lineup here basically had loop bumpers, whether you got the Newport Royal, the Newport Custom, or the New Yorker. They all had their variation of the loop bumper up front. Now let's transition to the side view, because this is where I think Chrysler stylists really did some excellent work. And notice here you have this gentle rising belt line that kind of continues from the start of the fender all the way through the midsection of the body, curves up very slightly there at the back portion of the rear window glass, and then you have it kind of kick up slightly for the rear quarter panel. And it makes it look as though this car is kind of hunched forward, that the rear is set high relative to the front. And yes, this is the stock ride height. This car is not on unlevel ground. this was done purposefully in order to give the car this look of motion. And it's really tough to do because there's not much complexity to the surfacing. We just talked about the hood and how simple the surfacing was on it. And the body side is equally simple. It's amazing. There's basically no creases, no bone lines, no feature lines, no swage lines, no nothing on this body side. It's very plain. Of course, it does have these side marker lamps, and then it has this very, very long molding that runs over top of the front wheel, kind of forming the wheel arch as well, an elegant touch. But that's about it when you look at the body side. There's not much else to it, and yet it's so elegant in the way that it's done. It makes this car look absolutely massive. Take a look at how long the rear overhang is on this ridiculously long car. And this is riding atop a very hefty wheelbase. I mean, the wheelbase is 124 inches, and the car is about 224 inches long. So there's 100 more inches, or let's call it roughly 9 feet more length, extending out over the wheels. And you certainly see that in the rear. Now, maybe that long rear overhang also helps the car a little bit with that look of motion. It kind of gives it that pointing downward look, I would say. It does have good dash to axle in spite of having still relatively decent front overhangs. And I think the interesting part here is you've got a relatively fat C-pillar, and the tall quarter makes for great trunk volume, about 21 cubic feet in these, just massive, but also gives you this look of privacy and kind of sinister, a sinister look as well, I must say, because that rear quarter is so high. It just makes the car look so imposing. It also pinches that back window a little bit, makes it smaller. Overall, these cars for the era were quite tall, to be honest. Remember, this was generally the era of lower, longer, wider. And the Ford vehicles, I would say in particular of the era, and the GMs were very low in terms of overall height. But one thing about these fuselage C-bodies was that they were relatively tall, and that just made them look all the more imposing, and that height you can see again, especially in the rear quarter panel. Now, as we transition to this rear view, I think this is an amazingly handsome and elegant rear view. You notice that very pinched backlight, as I was mentioning before. It's pinched because the quarter is so high. Look at the height and the length of the rear quarter in this car. Absolutely amazingly massive. The rear bumper is not the loop bumper style, but it certainly is, let's say, encompassing in terms of it stretching the entire length of the car. No bumper guards on this particular vehicle, but I do love some beautiful elements of symmetry here, like this surface that on the deck lid is relatively flat, where the deck lid is facing me as I'm taking the picture. That's a relatively flat surface, and notice how it's continued in the bumper form. I thought that was an especially elegant detail. It's otherwise a very simplistic deck lid. There's not much to it. It's just kind of flat. Although you have the beautiful kind of slope and fillet up to the top of the quarter panel on either side. And you have these very vertically oriented tail lamps that have a severe cant to them, something that you definitely wouldn't see on a Cadillac, where the lamps would be perfectly vertical in this time frame. But it gives you that little bit of a luxury cue. Interestingly, the Newport, the lower end car, had these vertical lamps, which are often synonymous with luxury, and the New Yorker, one up from this, would have horizontal lamps, a primary horizontal lamps. Here's another view from the rear on the passenger side, kind of a rear three-quarter, and I show this because it really shows off just how big the section is on the body side. And also a really great detail, there's this very fine shoulder that is formed in between the window glass and the door outer, as well as the quarter panel. And I thought that was a great detail, that there was just that thin shoulder there. So this car has such simplistic forms, and I think that's what makes it beautiful, is that they all work so harmoniously together, emphasizing the width of the car, the length of the car, and it's just beautifully sculptural and yet so simplistic. It's almost like eating a perfectly executed dish of spaghetti bolognese. And what I mean by that, the ingredients are simple, they're known, you don't have to guess them necessarily, and yet when it's done perfectly, there are a few things that are better. And here, everything is just so simple and yet it all comes together in a harmonious design from an exterior standpoint. I think these fuselage era cars are just a masterpiece. They're pretty underappreciated, especially the C bodies, but I think they're fantastic looking. Now, as we transition to the interior, my enthusiasm admittedly dampens a little bit because some of the materials that were employed on the Chryslers were not all that great. And that's despite these cars being priced pretty expensively. The Chrysler New Yorker actually went up in price point against the Oldsmobile 98 LS and the Buick Electra Limited. Not the base 98, not the Electra Custom, but the top of the line vehicles from Olds and Buick. And this Newport Custom kind of went up against not just the Delta 88, but really the 88 Royale and a little bit north of that. And I just don't think that the overall interior materials were all that great. The instrument panel is very simplistic, obviously a horizontal theme. This instrument panel was shared with Imperial, although Imperial did add more padding to it and faux wood grain. But clearly a horizontal in nature, a massive 120 mile per hour speedometer. You got the clock. This one thankfully does not have the auto temp climate control system. Just has the manual automatic climate control, which interestingly, most of the other auto companies, GM and Ford, if you had the manual climate control, you often got 4 fan speeds. Chrysler only gave you 3. But they did on some cars give you 3-speed wipers, whereas the others just gave you 2-speed wipers. So Chrysler just did things differently. I don't know quite why, but I guess they felt that that was the appropriate value add for the customer. At least you did get comfortable bucket seats with this super thickly padded armrest, although you had to make do with the Chrysler 3-spoke steering wheel that was employed on many different models. And as you can see here in this particular photo, these bucket seats and the rear seats were relatively comfortable, well padded. The material was pretty good overall, and Chrysler's seating comfort and overall roominess in these cars was quite good. That was one thing that Chrysler did well during this time frame was interior packaging. They often had more roominess than comparable Ford or General Motors designs of the time, both in, let's say, hip room as well as shoulder room and even headroom. These cars are relatively tall, as I mentioned, and that gave a lot more headroom than some of the other competitive vehicles from the big three. Now, under hood in your Chrysler Newport, you got the standard and new for 1972 Chrysler 400 cubic inch V8 that made 190 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque. There was an optional 440 cubic inch V8 that made 225 horsepower and I believe 345 pound-feet of torque. And there was even a higher output 440 that you could get under hood. But most of these Newports came with either that 400 or the 440, and these were excellent engines. Chrysler really was known for its powertrains during this time frame. Not just the engines, but also the 727 transmissions that were backing the engines. And it's unfortunate that the Chryslers of this era, while the engines themselves are strong mechanically, the, let's say, systems and componentry that they employed sometimes was not as robust, like the Carter thermoquad carburetors or the electronic ignition systems that these Chryslers have, and the ballast resistors and the original equipment spark plugs that they employed. I believe they were Presto Lights or Champions. They just were not good ignition components. And despite the fact these cars came with electronic ignition, they often suffered from ignition-related issues, and you'd see them broken down on the side of the road on a rainy day more often than not because of those things. Now, I will confess, having owned a number of Chryslers of this era, including 2 1972 Chrysler products, that I run AC Delco plugs in my Chrysler, and I will admit it runs great with AC Delco plugs. So if you're looking to replace the plugs on your full-size C-body or your Mopar, I highly recommend the standard AC Delco copper plugs. The only thing I will say is it is not a fun job on these cars. There's not a lot of working room. They're hard to get from the top. I got all of mine from the bottom of the car, and it is a bit of a hassle, especially compared to other vehicles of the era when you're trying to perform a tune-up. So that's this 1972 Chrysler Newport Custom. What do you think? Do you like the color? Do you think that the color looks good on this car? As I mentioned previously, I think it's not a bad color scheme, but put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.